Hello, everybody. It's Uncle John from Your Story Hour, and we're back for two more chapters from The Mallards and Their Neighbors by Neil Wayne Northey. Today's chapters are 27 and 28, and we'll get right to them now with chapter 27, which is entitled A Visit with Sandhill the Crane. You may be sure that the young Mallards were glad to get away when Bud lifted the big cage trap and turned them loose. They did not quite know what to think about it. Of course, Mr. Mallard had been banded before, but still he was not sure what Bud would do. A duck can never be sure what fearful the man will do or what fearful the man's boy will do. So the Mallards flew to the yellow stubble field to talk it over. They thought they would be safe there. The yellow stubble field was a long way from the duck pond. Farmer Smith had gathered the golden yellow grain long before, but there were so many tempting kernels on the ground that had fallen out of the heads. In a little while, the Mallards were so busy hunting tempting kernels that they were too interested to think about the big cage trap and their fright. They waddled about among the yellow stubbles and quacked their delight to one another. Finally, Ducky Doodles looked up at the sky. He heard a queer call from someone up there which he had never heard before. Caromp, caromp, it sounded far above. When Ducky Doodles saw a flock of strange birds with long necks sticking out in front and long legs sticking out behind. They were playing a game of sail, and they scarcely moved their wings. Ducky Doodles did not know whether they were friends or enemies. He was afraid they would swoop down like Sharptoes the Duck Hawk and carry away some of his brothers and sisters. "Oh, what are those strange birds up there?" said Ducky Doodles. "Those are Sandhill the Crane and his friends," said Mrs. Mallard. "Where are they going, Mother?" asked Ducky Diver. "They're going back to the sunny Southland before Old Man Winter comes down from the land of ice. I suppose Sandhill the Crane is all tired out and hungry after playing the game of sail all day. Perhaps he would like to stop and eat some of the tempting kernels." And Mrs. Mallard quacked as loud as she could to let Sandhill know that the yellow stubble field was a good place to stop. Sandhill the Crane heard and began to sail in a wide circle, followed by his friends. Sandhill was old and wise. He knew that sometimes Terror the Hunter put out wooden ducks and geese in the field to fool him, and used a coarse reed on which he quacked like a duck. The wooden decoys looked so much like live ducks that it was difficult for even Sandhill the Crane to tell the difference. He wanted to be sure. So Sandhill was not in any hurry to settle down in the yellow stubble field, even though he was hungry. Around and around sailed the cranes, spying out every place where Terror the Hunter might be hidden. "Quack, quack, quack, quack," said Mrs. Mallard. "Come on down. There is no danger here, and there are plenty of tempting kernels." "Carump, carump," said Sandhill the Crane. "Are you sure Terror the Hunter is not near?" "Yes, I am sure," quacked Mrs. Mallard. At last, Sandhill the Crane and his friends floated down and settled in the yellow stubble field near the Mallards. But Sandhill was not to be caught napping. Whenever he stopped to eat, he always posted sentinels to watch for Terror the Hunter. He had learned that it paid to be careful. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard knew that Sandhill the Crane was one bird that Terror the Hunter could not creep up on easily. You see, Sandhill was tall. He was almost as tall as Longlegs the Heron, and Longlegs was almost as tall as Bud. Sandhill could see a long way because he was so tall, and the Mallards felt quite safe when he was near with his sentinels. Sandhill the Crane was one of the first of the feathered friends to leave the chilly Northland before the Old Man Winter came down from the land of ice and covered the great wide world with a soft white blanket. Perhaps it was because Sandhill's long neck and legs got cold so easily that he came early. The Mallards knew that when he appeared it would soon be time for them to start for the sunny Southland. Of course, the Mallards did not mind the cold so much because they had thick, warm coats of glossy feathers, but they did mind it when the water froze over. The Mallards were having a fine time when suddenly one of the Sandhill's sentinels sounded an alarm. "Carump, carump," he said. "I see something suspicious." Then all Sandhill's friends stopped eating and looked. Sure enough, there was something dark at the edge of the field, and Sandhill decided that it was time to go. "Crump, crump," called Sandhill as he took to the air, and the Mallards did not waste any time getting back to the duck pond. "What do you suppose Sandhill the Crane saw?" asked Ducky Diver after the Mallards had reached the duck pond. "I did not see anything." "That's because you're young and your eyes are not yet trained to look for danger," said Mr. Mallard. "When you are as old as Sandhill the Crane, you will be able to see many things that you do not now notice." "Shall we go and see Sandhill again?" asked Ducky Doodles. "Perhaps we shall see him in the sunny Southland," said Mr. Mallard, "for he lives near us during the winter. We shall also meet other feathered friends who have been spending their summer in the chilly Northland." Chapter 28. Honker the Goose Takes a Rest. Honker the Goose left the land of cool breezes one day late in September. He had with him his family and some of his friends. He had lived all summer in the chilly Northland, where Mrs. Goose had built a nest near a lake and had raised 6 fine goslings. There had been a time during the summer when Honker the Goose and the other geese could not fly. You see, Honker wore a heavy coat of glossy feathers, and when the warm summer days came, he was too warm. So Honker had lost most of his feathers, including many from his wings, and for a while he had not enough to carry him. He lived on the ground and on the water then, and if danger came near, he had to run away or hide. If he was on water, he frequently dove out of sight and swam to the tumbled bulrushes to hide. As the playful air whiffs grew colder and colder, Honker's feathers grew in again, and by fall, when the fat goslings had grown their glossy feathers, Honker had also put on a bright new coat and was ready to fly again. One late September day, Honker called his family and some of his friends together and told them that it was time to start for the sunny Southland. Honker was in the lead, and behind him, in 2 long rows that made a large V in the sky, followed all the others. Honker was strong and wise, and he flew ahead of the others to guide them on the long journey so that they would be sure not to lose their way. Sometimes, when Honker grew tired, he would drop back into one of the lines, and one of his strong friends would take his place at the head of the big V. Sandhill the Crane and his friends had already started for the sunny Southland about 3 weeks before, but then Sandhill always started out ahead of almost everyone else. One day, while Honker and his flock were flying southward, the gray cloud ships came sailing across the sky, and the merry little snowflakes began to fall. It was rather confusing to know where to fly when Honker could not see the way, so as the weird darkness began to steal over the great wide world, Honker guided his flock downward in search of a resting place. "Honk, honk," said Honker the Goose as a signal, and "honk, honk, honk," answered the others all along the lines. Then the lines tipped downward, and soon Honker and his friends were skimming along not far above the ground. Suddenly, in the weird darkness, Honker saw a small patch of water. "Quack, quack, quack, quack," called someone far below, and Honker turned his flock and flew back over the water. Honker was tired, and his friends and his family were tired, and Honker did not spend so much time as he usually did in spying out the land before coming down. It was getting late, and it would be hard to find another resting place. Honker circled again and started back toward the water. Then he saw the grand old house. That was not the first time he had seen it, for Honker had made many trips. "It is the Old Homestead," said Honker, as he set his wings to glide down to the duck pond. "I know we shall be safe here." My, what a quacking and a honking there was as Honker and his flock plunked into the water near the Mallards. Even Bud heard it at the grand old house as he carried in the last armful of wood for the night. "Honker and his friends are back," said Bud as he piled the wood in the wood box. "And you should hear what a noise they are making with the Mallards." "I'm sure it's a sure sign Old Man Winter has arrived when Honker the Goose goes south," said Farmer Smith. But the next morning the laughing yellow sun came out, and For a week, Honker and his flock did not leave. Each morning, about the time that the smiling yellow sun was peeping out of the east, Honker would take his family to the rustling cornfield for breakfast. When they were full, they would fly back to the duck pond for a game of tip-up until afternoon. Then back to the rustling field they would go for supper, and at dark they would return to the duck pond for the night. Of course, the Mallards were enjoying trips to the rustling cornfield also, and sometimes they went to the yellow stubble field for a change. For some reason, Honker always liked to go back to the same place. One day, Terror the Hunter noticed that Honker always took his family to the same place to feed, so he thought he would hide in the rustling cornfield and get a goose when the flock came there for breakfast. But Honker was a wise old leader. He had been expecting Terror to do that very thing, and he was watching. He was not going to be caught off guard at any time. That morning, Honker noticed a bright flash as he circled over the field with his followers. The laughing yellow sun had flashed a warning reflection to Honker from Terror's shining gun, and Honker took his family to another place for breakfast. Then, instead of going back to the duck pond, he led them far, far to the southward toward their winter home. "Honker the goose has left," said Bud that night. "We must be going to have another storm." Of course, Bud did not know that Honker the goose had been alarmed by Terror the hunter. He thought Honker had left because a storm was coming, for Honker usually played sail ahead of the storms. Perhaps Honker left because he really did know a storm was on the way, but he had been frightened by Terror the hunter also. It was strange how Honker could tell when the merry little snowflakes were about to fall, for many of the wild creatures can do that. And that's the end of chapter 28. Come on back tomorrow, and Aunt Nikki will bring you the last 2 chapters of the Mallards and their neighbors. We'll see you then, and God bless. Bye-bye.